You guys don't want to work during the game? No problem. We'll work now. Goal line. That one. Again. Get that through your head. Again.
Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On today's episode, going to be doing the Knicks eulogy. They had one of the more disappointing seasons of any team in the league this year, and thus they have been eliminated from any chance at a play-in or playoff contention. So what happened this season, and what does their future look like as we move into the offseason and also beyond that? If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. Knicks fans have to be really disappointed with this year's team, especially given the year that they had last year. Last year's group was just really gritty, worked hard, and was just generally likable. It felt like the organization as a whole was just moving in the right direction. They were spending money wisely in free agency. They were finding value in the draft. Things were really starting to look up. And just what a difference a year can make. You go from being a beloved team that your fan base has really wrapped their arms around with home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs to a really unlikable team that just doesn't seem to work hard or care. And to not even make the play-in just has to be a huge disappointment. And going into this season, I expected the Knicks to take a significant step back just based on their offseason moves, but I never imagined it would be this complete and total disaster that it has been for them this season. And to their credit, the Knicks got off to a pretty hot start to begin the year, but then the wheels on the wagon just completely fell off. So what the hell happened here? Admittedly, as much as the Knicks have been on national TV, I haven't been watching them as much lately, but I think I have tortured myself enough throughout the year with Knicks games that I have a really good grasp on what they are as a team. This is a team that should have been looking to take the next step forward or at least continue the success that they had last season, even if they weren't building on it. And as bad as the offense has looked at times this year, in terms of points per game, there's almost no difference. Last year, they were at 107 points per game. This year, 106.4. Same thing with offensive rating. 110.2 last season, 109.7 this year. But defensively is where you've had the biggest slip up in this season. And while the Knicks are still pretty solid at 7th in points per game allowed, they were only 13th in defensive rating at 110.6. Last season, they were 1st in points allowed and 4th in defensive rating at 107.8. That's a pretty decent drop-off in terms of defensive rating, and when you combine that with an unproductive offense getting even less productive, that's just not going to be a recipe for success. So who is to blame for the Knicks' hugely disappointing season? Julius Randle is the guy I see scapegoated probably the most, but I really think the bulk of the blame should go to Tom Thibodeau and then slightly less blame to the front office. And that's not to say Julius Randle has been good this season, because he most certainly hasn't. He's obviously taken a step back in terms of his play. And for a guy who just got a big contract extension in the offseason, the optics on that are just not good. It's never a good sign to sign a huge deal and then immediately take a step back with your play along with the rest of the team. But for Randle, I really don't think this is a case of him mailing it in or working less hard on his game as a result of the contract. I'm actually going to take a really unpopular position here and defend him for a moment. And as I've said, I'm perfectly willing and able to acknowledge the fact that Randall hasn't been good this season. He settles for far too many jump shots, and he insists on taking more and more even when they aren't falling. To get out of shooting slumps, he just tries to shoot his way out of them rather than put his head down, get to the basket, and get some easy baskets and free throws. But, and this is a huge but, the Knicks game plan just does not put him in positions to get those opportunities. This isn't a game plan that's built around what he does well, and it doesn't seem to work to get Randall easy shots in the places that he's effective in. That directly falls on the coaching staff. And I've done this Julius Randle rant before, but I'm going to keep doing it until I see some things change with this Knicks game plan. Randall, out of necessity on this team, is the number one option and primary playmaker for this team. And both of those things are egregious miscasts of who he is as a player. The number one option thing is somewhat excusable for the Tom Thibodeau piece, just because there really isn't anyone else on this team that can handle the type of workload it would take to be a number one option. But the role they have Julius Randle playing is just inexcusable. I think if the Knicks were to get another star player, you could start to feel pretty good about Julius Randle as a second option and that version of him as a player. And I think you're thrilled with the third option version. But the Knicks just don't have the horses to make that a reality. So I'm not going to kill Tom Thibodeau too much for that. But as for how they use him, as a primary ball handler, three-point threat, and the main playmaker, basically a point guard. That is just about as big of a misunderstanding of who Julius Randle is as a player as you can make, and I'm absolutely going to put that on Tibbs. He can do those things. Sure, he's a capable passer. He's got a decent shot. He handles the ball pretty well for a power forward, but none of those things are what he is best at. He's best at being a player in the mid post where he can face up and kick it out, or he can just lower his shoulder and take it to the hoop. He's best in situations where he can make quick decisions, playmaking wise or scoring wise, not break down a defense. He needs someone who could get him the ball in his spots, and he's just never going to be effective at working himself into those spots. I like, for the Randall ball handling piece, I do like him with a head of steam on the fast break, but he should just never be initiating half-court offense. And honestly, I'm not sure my eyes can take viewing another Julius Randle step-back three. Also, when things started going bad for the Knicks, why didn't Tibbs make any adjustments? Why did he continue carting out these vets who can barely be bothered to try? There are young players on this roster who come off the bench who play really hard and give really great effort. Players like Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes before he was hurt, Obi Toppin, Jericho Sims. Why not give those guys a chance to start when you're not winning games in the first place? Why would you not want to reward them for the effort that they put in and maybe light a fire under those veterans? It just seems like a no-brainer to go with Emmanuel Quickley at the point versus Alec Burks, or when Evan Fournier was struggling, you could insert it either Grimes or Quickley. At times, Fournier just really struggles shooting the ball, and he just kind of lethargically moves around out there at times. It just looks like he's pretty disinterested. And then why are they playing Taj Gibson at all? There are tons of center options on this team, and I just can't understand why you would just want to cart out this old guy when you're not winning games anyway. Also, what in the world are they doing with Kemba Walker this year? Early in the year, they remove him from the rotation in this weird attempt to make him out to be the scapegoat for their struggles. And then they end up having to bring him back when Omicron broke out. And then now they've just sent him home for the year with no plans to buy him out. I'm not totally against benching him or reducing his role when things were going bad if it was in the interest of playing your young guys more. If Tibbs had said, hey, we're taking Kemba Walker out of the rotation or reducing his role because we want to see what Emmanuel Quickley is as a starter, as the lead guard, as the point guard, that makes a ton of sense to me, but that's not what played out. Tibbs has elected to go with Alec Burks at point guard. You know, the career backup wing player Alec Burks, the 30-year-old who at no point in his NBA career and quite possibly his life has been asked to play point guard. Yeah, we want him to be the starting point guard of one of the most famous franchises in the world. We are doing it at the cost of sending home one of the most beloved players in the NBA and a famously great teammate in Kemba Walker, who is also from New York. Also, we have a second-year combo guard who we might need to find out at some point whether he can play point guard in the NBA. Yeah, no, let's go with the career shooting guard, small forward at point. That makes a lot of sense. Outside of the really questionable playing time decisions, the front office has made their fair share of blunders as well, and it's clear that they just aren't on the same page with the coaching staff. In the offseason, they made some really questionable decisions. In terms of free agents, they had Evan Fournier 4 years, $78 million, and Kemba Walker 2 years, $18 million. Obviously, it's a little weird that they bring in Kemba Walker only to almost immediately bench him. But outside of that, DeMar DeRozan signs a 3-year, $83 million deal with the Bulls. Basically, you can look at it in terms of they decided to go with Fournier and Kemba Walker as opposed to DeMar DeRozan. That decision has aged like milk. And I was higher on DeMar than most coming into this year, but I didn't see the level of production that he's had coming, and I doubt anyone did. But just in general, it's always better to take the one good player or the one great player as opposed to the two okay ones. When in doubt, you should always take the better player. And to kind of continue to harp on this point, it's not as if we couldn't see the Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker struggles coming. On the Kemba Walker side of things, history says that small guards over the age of 30 are just never the same player. Also, it looked pretty much over for him last year in Boston, and there just weren't any signs that he was going to be a really productive player going forward. And for Evan Fournier, he didn't exactly light the world on fire during his time with Boston. And even prior to that, with the Magic, he's statistically one of the worst playoff performers we've ever seen in the history of the league. So while no one saw the DeMar DeRozan thing coming this season, even with that, most people were raising their eyebrows at the Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier contracts. As far as the guys they brought back, bring back Randall, 4 years, 117, 2 years, 20 for Burks, 3 years, 43 for Derrick Rose, 3 years, 27 million for Nerlens Noel, 2 years, 10 million for Taj Gibson. And for the Julius Randle one, while it doesn't look great now, he was an all-NBA guy last year, MVP candidate. And I think coming off of a year like that, they did pretty well to get him for the deal that they did. I'm not super happy about $10 million a year for Alec Burks, but whatever. 3 years for Derrick Rose just seems like a lot at the stage he's at in his career. But the ones that really killed me were the 2 years, $10 million for Taj Gibson, and the 3 years, $27 million for Nerlens Noel. That's $14 million a year in backup centers, one of which who is always hurt, and the other of which is like 80 years old. I don't love most of what they did, so a D grade for them in terms of what they did in the offseason. I think a D is a fair offseason grade with hindsight, but even in the time, I don't think anybody would have given them much more than a C. I think D is probably what you would have given them in terms of a grade entering the season. During the season, they did really nothing at the trade deadline, which is just insane for me. And I know there weren't a lot of interest in the players on this team that they were wanting to move off of, but it seemed like they needed to change up something. I guess we can sort of consider the Cam Reddish deal as part of the trade deadline. And while they got him for basically nothing, he's barely played for them. That's the piece that just screams to me that the front office and the coaching staff aren't on the same page. And I know right now he's out for the rest of the season, but when he was on the team, he just wasn't playing enough considering his age and potential, and the fact that Tibbs was just sticking with the same old with no results to show for it in terms of the guys he was playing. The team was really struggling and just desperate for any breath of new life when they brought him in, and they barely used him. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. RJ Barrett has really been the only bright spot for this team this year. He's about 20 a game, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. And for the Barrett part, while I'm not thrilled with 41% on field goals, I think the 35% on threes is more than adequate. He's shown some flashes as a potential go-to scorer at the wing, and he really competes hard on the defensive end. I'm not sure that he's quite a plus-level defender, but I don't think he's a minus by any means. And just the fact that he gives tons of effort and isn't afraid to take the other team's best option when he's on defense just really speaks volumes to what he could be as a player. If he continues at the rate he is going, the Knicks have a cornerstone building block moving forward. Of the eulogies I've done so far, this is the first team that I've covered that wasn't tanking. I guess Indiana didn't enter the year tanking, but injuries kind of forced them into one. The Knicks have been trying to compete all season when you judge them for their playing time decisions and the trade deadline decisions or lack thereof. So it's understandable that I'm being really negative toward them. But what should the game plan be heading into the offseason? What can they do to get things turned back around and headed in the right direction, outside of praying, of course? I think first and foremost, Tibbs has to go. And just in general, as a fan, I'm not typically a just blame the coach guy. That's going to solve all of our issues. But to me, it's clear that he's lost the locker room here, and he just isn't getting good, consistent effort out of the veterans and even some of the young guys. And when you compile that with the idiotic offensive game plan that they have, I just don't see a way around getting rid of him. I've never really liked him as a coach, so maybe it's just my bias coming out. Player personnel wise, obviously, they could get really lucky in the lottery, but they won't have very good odds. So I think it's fair to say they're likely not going to get a destiny changing player in the draft, but it's not inconceivable that they're going to get somebody who can make a difference for them. Draft wise, big guys like Mark Williams, Jalen Duren, they should be off the board for them. They have too many bigs as it is who want playing time. A playmaking point guard would be ideal for them, but honestly, just getting some more scoring punch would go a long way too. There are tons of solid wings in this draft who can help you right away, so that's good news for the Knicks. Of the guys currently on the roster this season, they do have a big decision to make with Mitchell Robinson free agency-wise. I really like Robinson, although he isn't quite there as a player yet. He still gets himself into foul trouble with some bad decisions or overcommitting defensively, but the potential is there for him to be a really special defensive anchor and rebounder who can also be a good lob threat. I wouldn't want to offer him anything approaching the max, and I would really be most comfortable in like the $10 to $15 million a year range, but I would be willing to give him pretty much as many years as he wants on that. If a team comes in and wants to offer him 20 plus million a year, I'm happy to let him walk away at that number. RJ Barrett is also going to be eligible for an extension this offseason, and I think it's important that they get something done this offseason on him. Barrett isn't likely going to be able to get the max this offseason, but if he continues to improve at the rate he is, somebody is going to pay him the max. If they can get him for like a $20 to $25 million a year range, I would be really happy with that. Among the other guys and the guys who are under contract on the roster, Julius Randle is probably at the top of the list in terms of potential trade candidates, but I'm actually really against the Knicks doing this. Not because I'm sold on Julius Randle being a part of the Knicks' long-term plans. I really don't think that at all, actually. I just think it would be a mistake to sell low on Julius Randle. Right now, his trade value is pretty low, and a team that would likely be trading for him would almost view it as, we're doing the Knicks a favor by taking on this contract. We're doing you the favor. So if you're able to get a new coach in here who ran an offense that showcased Julius Randle's talents more than none, you are much more likely to convince somebody that he's an asset. Obviously, I want to keep all the young guys. Derrick Rose, I'm happy to keep. The rest of the vets on the team, I pretty much want off the roster. The Kemba Walkers, the Alec Burks, the Evan Fourniers. But for the Kemba piece, you're not likely trading him unless he gets thrown in as part of a bigger trade. So maybe buy him out just to build some goodwill. In general, the Knicks should really be trying to push their chips in for a star player, like signing Bradley Beal or some type of sign and trade for him, maybe James Harden or Kyrie Irving. If those situations completely torpedo, I know Kyrie has said he's re-signing with the Nets, but he said that about Boston. He said that about Cleveland, that he's not wanting to leave. And James Harden, same thing. Like he said, he was going to be signing with the Nets, and we saw how that played out. So if the Nets lose in the play-in and it's like really ugly, I wouldn't rule out Kyrie leaving. Same thing with kind of Harden. I think we've seen over the past 2 years with James Harden how volatile he can be. And if it just completely flames out in the playoffs for Philly's playoff hopes, I think you could definitely see him walking out the door. Outside of that, there's maybe Damian Lillard. But I think they should try to push for Donovan Mitchell. There have been real signs that Mitchell is unhappy. And if they flame out in the playoffs, like it looks like they may, given the way that their season is going right now, I would expect Rudy Gobert to be on the move, or if Mitchell asks out, Donovan Mitchell on the move. The Knicks have all of their picks. They have tradable contracts and young assets to make that work. That type of deal is likely costing you RJ Barrett, but I'd be willing to do that for Donovan Mitchell since he's still pretty young. If they aren't able to trade for a star player or sign one, as much as Knicks fans might not want to hear this, I think entering a rebuild is the way to go. You can build around RJ Barrett, and there are plenty of other young players on this team that Knicks fans can be fairly excited about. As for getting out of the Nerlens Noel, Fournier, Kemba, et cetera, veteran group contracts, there is a deal out there that could work to get all those guys off the books. And I can't believe I'm going to suggest this. Let me first of all state that this is a last resort type move. It only makes sense in the case that the Knicks don't move up in the draft. They strike out in free agency and strike out in terms of adding a star player via trade. The Knicks should trade for Russell Westbrook. I know. It sounds insane and extremely on brand for the Knicks, but hear me out. It's only 1 year of Russell Westbrook on that absurd contract. You get out of all of your bad contracts in one move. You're still able to tank, and you're giving Knicks fans a box office type player. Also, you can lean into the nostalgia of having a Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook backcourt. That's still giving Knicks fans something to be somewhat excited about. And then honestly, though, Russell Westbrook, Julius Randle, RJ Barrett as your three best players, that isn't really that bad. But the real prize I'm going after is the 2027 Lakers first round pick. That's the main reason I would do this deal as the Knicks. Again, out of all of my bad contracts in one move, I'm able to hit the reset button basically right away. And because there isn't a trade market for Russell Westbrook outside of the John Wall swap, which is also going to cost the Lakers that 2027 first, I, as the Knicks, can dictate the asking price. Maybe I can get an additional pick swap down the road. But as the Lakers, I would be far more interested in getting all this depth back with Evan Fournier, Bergs, Noel, Kemba, whatever, any of those vets. I would be much more interested in that than doing this one-for-one John Wall swap that may or may not help me. For the Knicks' perspective, the Lakers are likely going to be abysmal in 2027. So this could be a really high draft pick that is going to come around the time that you as a team are gearing up to compete, or you might even already be competing if you have the right rebuild plan in place. Having said all of that, your number one priority as the Knicks should be getting a star player in here. But if you can't do that, a quick reset via 1 year of Russell Westbrook isn't going to be the worst thing to do, given you have a plethora of young guys already on the team. And you also have all of your draft picks. But the Knicks seem hell-bent on competing right away, so if they aren't able to make a trade for a star player, I expect them to continue to overpay for these uninspiring free agents, but hopefully I'm wrong. Basketball is just better when the Knicks are good.